Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Liias. I'm a Roman Catholic priest, serving most recently at the Catholic Church of St. Patrick's in Stoneham, but I've lived here in the Melrose community for 31 years and been doing this show almost for that long. So for many of you, welcome back to the show. Our conversation always at this program is based on faith, the journey of faith in a person's life, how they've come to faith, but just as importantly, the fruit of that faith in terms of their life and their life's work. Today, it's wonderful to welcome Dr. Randall Isaac. He is a physicist, but he also comes as a representative of a particular organization, the American Scientific Affiliate, which is an organization devoted to the conversation between Christians and science and the unity. It's a place for especially Christian scientists to come and gather together and bear witness to their faith, and particularly to engage in that creative conversation with science and the scientific community. So welcome, Doctor.
Thank you. It's
good
a pleasure
to have
be
you
here.
And good to see you again. And
thank you for having me.
One of you are, as you know, one of our common friends who's gone home to the Lord.
Yes.
Bob Herman, Dr. Robert Herman, I believe was he one of the founders of?
No, he wasn't a founder.
But he was the president of it?
He was the executive director for about 10 years.
Right.
That's correct.
But it was through him, in particular, his work with the Templeton Foundation,
Yes.
which my son actually worked at for a number of years,
I see.
that I got a lot more exposure to that creative and challenging conversation between faith and science. But that's further down the line.
Okay.
The first part of the show about you and your own journey in faith and how you became a Christian and your own
Sure.
relationship to the Lord. So talk a little bit about that as far back as relevant as
how
you
many
can remember.
centuries do we go? Well, actually, I'm a farm boy who grew up in a Mennonite farming community in Kansas, and of course,
Where?
Southwest Kansas.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Right, great.
that's ways off. My great-grandparents emigrated over from South Russia, or Ukraine now.
And how far back
in
did they go
Moscow.
in their immigration?
Well, they went there. Catherine the Great invited them there from Prussia, where they were for a few hundred years, and before that, they came from Netherlands. So they've been migrating for quite a while.
Yeah,
but their expertise was agriculture, and they really brought the red winter wheat from Ukraine to Central America, and it was really the Mennonite community, several tens of thousands who emigrated during that time period, that created the breadbasket of the world.
Oh, really?
Right in the middle.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that connection.
It was a fascinating connection.
And
there.
those who don't, say just a few words, even though I know something of the Mennonite tradition. Just what's a Mennonite?
Well, Mennonite was after Menno Simons, who is shortly after the Reformation.
That's
there,
right.
not that long, and of course there were many different leaders, the different splits that came through. But some of the things that characterize the Mennonites are pacifism, and certainly it was a separatist kind of movement. They're out of the world and conservative focus and really personal salvation, very focused on personal salvation.
And the early name for a lot of them were Anabaptists, right?
Well,
they were called
Anabaptists is a larger category,
but they're part of that.
They're all Anabaptists as well.
And Anabaptists, to be baptized again.
Yes.
That was a name that was given to them not by their own,
No,
by their enemies, saying, "Oh, those are guys who baptize again." But it was really the origin of what we call believers' baptism came through that movement. Isn't that
Very
correct?
much so.
Yeah,
Right.
which is actually quite common in many Protestant denominations, even though they don't know where it came from.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't know our history as well as we
I know.
should.
Well, that's part of the problem there.
So it almost feels as if I was born into Christianity because you're really an isolated.
Well, you really
community.
are a counterculture. Right? I mean,
very much so, counterculture.
In a very unique way.
I still grew up speaking German in my home. We retained the language.
Wow.
I lost it by now, but it was a German dialect that we spoke at home until I went to school. So it was, we had our own churches, our own schools, and rather isolated in many ways. And of course, church was the focal point of our social lives, and we were there several times a week. And of course, each year, There were a couple of 2-week revival meetings, where you'd go every night, and with an altar call every night.
So you gave your life to Christ at least
course.
14 times a year.
Several times, right, and one of them stuck somewhere. So it was that really was an immersion. And we had our own high school at the time, and a lot of Bible classes, so it came up. So then for my junior year in high school, the economics at that time were such we could not sustain our own schools, so we had to consolidate. And I got to thinking, I was 16 years old before I really had a friend or really met a peer who was my age who wasn't a Mennonite or a Christian.
Wow.
So the towns were a long ways off, and we'd go there for business, but I wouldn't play with any friends like that. So it was an eye-opener for me, and it just broadened my eyes to a world that I didn't know existed. And therein lay the focal point of some of my doubts about faith and really what set my career. Because at that time, my brother gave me 2 books about science and faith. And these turned out to be strong young earth creationist books. But I didn't know anything. I hadn't appreciated much of the outside world.
You might explain, because even though I know what that means.
You know what that is. It
some
means
people might not know what young earth creation is.
Right. That term refers to those who believe that the Bible teaches that the earth was only between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, and that the scientific evidence somehow corresponds to that. So what these books told me, and I hadn't appreciated this before, that scientists as a whole are atheists, they're anti-God, they're seeking how to deny God, and so they've concocted this belief in evolution and an old earth in order to negate the Bible. So it's a conspiracy theory.
Was that the prevailing kind of ethos, theology of the Mennonites?
Well, I never heard about it in church or anything. It was more very consistent with what I was taught, and I believe they all, and it turns out later they said it more publicly, but yes, that was kind of the focal point. But that's what grabbed me, and I thought that was great. That was all I knew. Okay, and what my journey of faith got a shock when I went to Wheaton College. That very liberal school. For those of you who aren't aware, it's in Wheaton, Illinois, not the Wheaton over here. Another Wheaton College here. But 2 things shook me. One was that my suite mate was a ROTC major. Now, ROTC was a Reserved Officer Training Corps, and Wheaton College had a mandatory program. And of course, I was a pacifist. And it shocked me that a Christian could actually participate in the military. I hadn't realized that. So that was
another kind of
an element of cognitive dissonance there. And my science professors didn't go along with these books I'd read. They said, wait a minute, what's happening here? And that was a real crisis for me. So what is going on? And
I suppose there was a double crisis. It wasn't just meeting people like that, because you probably knew there were people like that out there, but you didn't know they could be Christians.
And I didn't, exactly, and I'd gotten to trust them. And to know them. And in a few years, it was a real dilemma. I said, no matter which way I turn, I have to conclude that there's a strong group of Christians that I respect who are wrong. And that didn't work for me. That was tough. Well, I had to go to graduate school in physics and study all this for myself. I had to figure out what's really true, and what's going on.
I'd be curious, going backwards, why, given the kind of, again, the cultural context you grew up in, and the kind of closed-in community, closed-inness of Mennonite community, which has some wonderful qualities about it, but also limitations, why'd you go to Wheaton?
Well, a little bit because I'm the youngest of 5, and the rest of them all went to the Mennonite schools. And I wanted to go somewhere else.
And
I wanted to break out.
We always say in the evangelical world, which I consider Wheaton's the Harvard of the evangelical world. So the brightest kids go to Wheaton out of the kind of Christian evangelical tradition.
Well, that was kind of where when I heard about it, I said,
Yeah.
oh, I'd like to try it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, and through graduate school,
Where'd you go to grad school?
in University of Illinois.
And you were, at
Urbana-Champaign.
that point, interested in science?
Oh, yeah. I mean, by that time, I was...
You were interested in science from the early
pretty
on,
well
as a
interested in
kid.
science from the beginning, but particularly, it was my high school physics class that really turned me on to physics.
Ah.
Why? Because I was able to do it as a self-study program. I had a conflict in my schedule, and
Yeah.
the superintendent said, this is a small school in Kansas. He and the physics teacher said, here's the book, why don't you go through it? and I devoured it. It was just fabulous. And so I said, I've got to study physics. So that was a key factor. Wheaton had a good physics department, which was a key
And
factor.
physics itself is not a direct assault on kind of a Christian faith, the way something like, obviously, evolutionary science and stuff like that, biological science.
Yeah, in a way, there's geology and biology are a little bit more in the
Yeah.
focus, but really physics is,
More
of course, I would do
theoretical.
that, a little bit of an
Yeah.
umbrella, we cover
Yeah,
everything.
right,
So
everything.
So in that. So I was able to really dig in on my own and kind of understand
Right.
where things go. And during that time, at Wheaton and at graduate school, that's where the American Scientific Affiliation came in and had such a big effect on my life. Now, that organization is old. It's going to be 80 years old in
Okay.
September 5, in a couple of weeks. It'll celebrate its 80th birthday. September 5, 1941. It was on the recommendation of Irvin Moon out of Moody Bible Institute. Will Houghton, the president, convened, and 5 scientists showed up because he called it something. And those 5 are the founders of our organization. It came through, but it was really their work, their publication that I turned to and read, and the father of the girl I was dating was a member, so that helped, of course. And
You
she's
married
now
into
my
the
wife.
science.
I married into it. But it was really the American Scientific Affiliation that helped me sustain my faith through graduate school and into my career. I had a fabulous career at IBM, Thomas J. Watson Research Center. So in the whole semiconductor technology world.
So that was the other thing I was going to ask you, as you, starting with your interest in physics from high school, where were you heading for career-wise? What did you envision doing with all this?
Well, at first my goal was to teach, because my teachers, both in high school and in college, were so impressive to me. They had such an influence on my life. I mean, they really helped me see a bigger world. And I said, I want to be like that. So I want to teach. And ultimately, through graduate school, I said, yeah, I'm going to teach at the college level. So that was my goal. Yeah. The last thing I wanted was industry. In fact, I said, when they offered me an IBM fellowship at graduate school, I said, not if I have to work there, because I knew God had called me to teach at a college. That was where it was. So, but jobs were not available when I graduated. IBM gave me an offer. I said, well,
you get
all right.
You got a PhD, right?
Yes, yes, that's right. And
that's right, I introduced you.
You did.
I forgot,
you did.
It's Dr.
You
Randall.
forgot. So they offered me a job. I said, well, maybe for a year or two, but I have to go. But ironically, a month after I took the job at IBM, I got a letter from Gordon College saying they now have an opening in physics. But that was in the days when I still thought you had to keep commitments. So I had committed myself to IBM, but it was the best thing. Yeah. It was a wonderful career.
Where'd you work with IBM?
In Yorktown Heights, New York. This is headquarters of the Thomas J. Watson Research Center. And in 1977, they really caught the upswing of the semiconductor industry. So I was very fortunate, managed to...
Is that up the Hudson? Where is that?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
It's
just
interesting, my daughter lives in Saugerties, New York. It's a little further up the river.
It's a little further up.
And I'd say Mass at a number of the Catholic churches out there. But it's interesting, the history, all those communities were kind of a suburban growth back in the 60s, all related to IBM. It was a place where IBM workers were buying houses and living out there. And it was still country originally, but the growth of IBM created basically a kind of a suburban growth, not around any big city, but around the Saugerties, Kingston, New York, Poughkeepsie,
Fishkill,
interesting.
Right,
and then IBM left, and they're
yes, I understand.
the churches were all built basically for those workers, and they
it is.
when they left, the churches suffered too.
It was a great career, and I for the last 7 years, I was the research vice president for the systems and technologies. We kind of had all the hardware piece. Really enjoyed it, but at some point, I hit the retirement age, and my wife says, "What are you going to do now?"
In all those
because
years,
you've done nothing.
Just to back up,
Yeah.
to talk about your faith in those years and your affiliation, not with the scientific affiliation, but with the church.
Yeah, right. Well,
What
basically,
was your
church.
journey
I primarily went to Community Bible Church there in New York, which, being located close to IBM, there were a number of scientists there, which is unusual in churches in many kinds.
And was it the flavor of that place kind of evangelical?
Yes,
Yeah,
it was very
Protestant.
So
you had
it was
left
Plymouth Brethren background.
Oh, Plymouth
The
Brethren
church
background.
was, but no longer at the time.
And had you kind of left the Mennonite universe?
Yes, partially because there were no nearby Mennonite churches, and Wheaton had taught me that yes, non-Mennonites could be Christians. That was a real insight. we
so
didn't
there was such a thing
realize
as a
that.
non-Mennonite Christian, so you figured
That's
you were
right.
still a Christian, but not a Mennonite.
And so I realized that the particular denomination wasn't the primary issue here. So yes, and during that time, the church was a critical factor, but it was the local section of the American Scientific Affiliation that really brought in speakers and people to deal with, and I credit them for helping me keep my faith, because I went through some hard times. So it was not an easy time, and I remember getting top-notch scientists coming in to speak at the local chapter of the ASA, and wow, I was impressed with them, and I says, I'm not sure about all this faith stuff, but if he can keep this faith, scientists like that, maybe I can hang on as well. And that really, and it provided me a lot of books and a lot of introductions, which I didn't have time to read very much. Each year I'd probably have maybe a week or a couple of weeks of vacation, and I would save up all my journals and books and frantically read them on vacation.
Well, tell me, going back to those years, a couple of the things that kind of precipitated the crisis. So what was the crisis over in your own intellectual and life around faith and science? And then what kind of, besides the fact that, if he's this smart scientist believes, I guess I can stay Christian, but at some level you must also have been able to accommodate the conversation between faith and science.
Yes. So first of all, the issue that got me going in it, which is all the age of the earth or evolution or these kind of issues, were always there, still are, and it was something I needed to deal with personally, and it's an ongoing process, and I still enjoy doing that. And the other aspect of that was simply a lot of personal things that we go through life. How do we understand what's happening in my life versus God's control? Where is this? Divine action versus human action is really what's going on.
And those aren't necessarily, there's a scientific dimension to those, but that's stuff every Christian, where are you now, God? What are you What are you doing now?
And it was really some of the scientists who came through who really helped work through this kind of notion, and it's still ongoing, right? I mean, how do we make sense of what's happening in my life? Is this if this is what's happening? So what I said when it came time to retirement, I says, this ASA group has been so effective. After spending my career really helping IBM meet its quarterly targets, I'd really like to pay it back and have ASA help other students. I want to pass it on to others. And so I called, I'd gotten to know Bob Herman at that, because he came down a number of times for our local chapter meeting. So I got to know Bob, but Bob had moved on then, and Don Monroe was there. So I called Don and says, can I volunteer? I'd like to volunteer to be help your organization to do this. And he says, well, I just resigned, so you can take my place. And I said, no way. But after God dealt with me and my wife a few months, we said, yeah, let's give that a try. And so in 2005, we moved from New York up here, and
Was that because of
yes,
ASA?
yes,
Oh.
yes, exactly. And
Do you have an office in the North Shore there?
yeah, we had one in Ipswich there.
Ipswich, that's right.
It wasn't Bob Herman's house initially.
Oh, well, I've been there many times.
You've been there a little bit,
Yeah.
and then it was right there on Market Street in downtown
all right,
Ipswich.
all
So we were there about 6 or 7 years ago. The office has moved to Topsfield, but
it's still
at that
North
time
Shore,
it was all in Ipswich. So
So what does the work do? Talk about that.
yeah, basically we publish a quarterly journal,
Yeah.
and we now have an online. That journal is Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. Then we have an all online version, which is God and Nature. It's a separate piece. It's a little lighter. The journal is intended to be of top quality, peer-reviewed, technical type articles, whereas the online version is a little shorter, a little lighter, a little easier reading. We want a broader audience for that. So those are two things. But a key factor for us is fellowship, real fellowship. We're trying to bring together scientists who are Christians, Christians who are scientists, bring them together to get to know each other.
Yeah.
Because scientists are in a great minority in most churches, and Christians are, which way does it go now?
Yeah.
Scientists are a minority in the church,
Right.
and Christians are a minority in the science lab. Yeah, that's where it goes.
Yeah.
So our kind of focus is to bring us together, and we don't take a position on controversial positions. We're there for dialogue, and we focus on quality of science and quality of theology, and focusing on the mainstream thoughts and really have an understanding of it. But we want civil discourse and dialogue between each other.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and it's a real. I remember either reading recently or listening to. I don't know if you've heard of Bishop Robert Barron. In the Catholic world, he's really a top-notch thinker and very bright man. But he's also trying to do a lot of work on the process of evangelism of the faith. But and they're doing a lot of work on science and faith, because they said that one of the primary impediments to young people engaging the Christian faith is they believe it's anti-science.
Right.
And obviously you and I know that's not true, but that is
right.
That is the milieu, the kind of.
It is, and that's the history of most of our members. They've grown up dealing with that, and now we find each other and we're dialoguing.
Yeah.
We also have an annual meeting. So what I really, now that I've become emeritus, I can spend a lot more time to, instead of fundraising and administration, to think about more. And where I think, from a big picture, there are four basic questions that I think need to be addressed by anyone, any Christian, any scientist in this area. Four main questions that we need to deal with. The first is, what does the Bible teach us about science and history? And how does that teaching relate to what we know in science and history? And I could talk for hours on each of these, but that's the source of much discord.
Say that again.
What does the Bible teach us about science and history? Nothing, or everything?
Yeah.
And everything in between.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a crucial source. Some people are saying it teaches us when creation happened, and others say it doesn't.
Yeah, right.
Okay, everybody's got to deal with it.
Clarified. I thought that's what you meant. I want to be clarified.
Second big question is, what is the relationship between a scientific explanation and a theological explanation? And we have to work through that, because again, there's a whole spectrum here. There's much too much of a tendency in our society today to think that one explanation excludes the other.
Yeah.
And Mark Knoll calls that univocity, from John Duns Scotus a little bit. And he says we've distorted this concept of single essence of being here into a university where, hey, if you find a scientific explanation, that means it wasn't God. You don't need God. Or if you have a theological explanation, you can't have a scientific one. And that causes a lot of problem. People like Stephen Hawking will say, hey, we've got the explanation, so there's no need for God.
No need for the hypothesis
and that's
of God,
a key point over there. So then another key question is what is the relationship between purpose and chance? And this is a big one because the core of Christian thought is God's purpose for our lives and what God's purpose is for the world and so on. And yet we see in randomness that is inherent here. How do we reconcile a lot of this? And we see randomness as an inherent part of the universe. And how do we reconcile that with our faith? And the fourth and last is how do we understand human action vis-a-vis divine action? What is divine action? There's a lot of study. We don't know. We just don't know how divine action works. And how is God actually working in our world today? And what does that mean into how we act? And what is that interface? And how does it go? A lot of questions that are there. So these are kind of the big pictures
and they're deeply profound philosophical questions.
Right.
And complicated.
Well, they don't have an answer in 25 words.
I've just been told we have 3 minutes left.
All
so
right.
I don't think we're going to solve this problem.
Well, we should at least be able to
We'll
solve
have
two
to have
of
you
them,
back
right?
for 5 or 6 more times.
I'd be happy to. We could spend a lot of time on these questions. Right?
But I think the bottom line is just this vision that obviously out of your own faith and the work of this particular organization is there are challenges intellectually here, but there's a fundamental unity. I mean that's a kind of is a philosophical principle of the Christian faith. Truth is one.
Right.
There isn't, there's a unity ultimately because there's only one God.
Right. There's the unity that we have to seek.
And St. John says in his, all in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and all things are made through Him. This sense it's a unity reflected in everything that is fundamentally
it is
grounded in
not
only in God, but we believe in Christ. And so
exactly. I would encourage any listener to look us up on the internet, asa3.org. ASA stands for American Scientific Affiliation, and the numeral 3, because there's several of those, asa3.org. And we have tremendous background. All of our journals back to 1948 or so are online. And
I've got a few that Bob gave me, but I've never subscribed to it. I may do that.
Right. It's in there.
Because I'm married to a scientist.
Yes,
too.
I remember.
My wife is a mathematician, and so it's been a challenging marriage. But she's a Christian. But I actually have always enjoyed the conversation between. I really, I'm a bit of a naturalist in the sense I love nature. So there's a unity and a beauty. It's part of my faith.
It is. Right.
Matter of fact, I think I believed in God more originally because of nature and science. Anyway, 1 minute to go. Would you come back? And I mean, I like to explore some of these questions more. And not because just my intellect, but I know this is one of the most challenging edges of the evangelical task of the church.
It is.
We have to engage people intellectually responsibly at this level.
I'd be glad
as well as there are other ways we engage it, but I think
I'd be glad to spend a session on each of these 4 questions because I think that's kind of, for me at least, the umbrella of.
Well, thank you, Randy. That was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Continued blessings on your work, even in your retirement.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Bob. Christians never retire.
Never.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us in this conversation about faith and science with Dr. Randall Isaac. Again, it's American Scientific Affiliation 3, Roman numeral 3, or just the number 3? 3. If you're really interested in getting more information, or you're a scientist and would like to be part of this particular work of witness. Thank you.